Over the past day, nothing has changed in Alyosha's condition. Doctors assessed him as stable and serious. All intensive medical measures have not yet had a significant effect. When Maxim cautiously entered the familiar room and quietly inquired about the affairs of his wife, who was sitting next to her son in the same position, she only raised her longing-filled eyes and shook her head negatively. Maxim sat down next to her and squeezed Elena's hand, hoping to cheer her up a little, but it didn't seem to work out well. She didn't react to her husband's attempt in any way. Then she began asking meaningless questions, listlessly listening to lengthy answers. Maxim waited until Lena had recovered a little and asked the question he had been waiting for the answer to all day. "Lena, have you tried to contact the princess or Pavel Ivanovich?" Lena smiled sadly. Only then did she speak. Max, you're a stupid kid who still believes in miracles. Understand, this is impossible in principle, but why? I told you yesterday." Then she took pity on the naive crank and added in a tired voice, "I've been trying, all evening and all night trying, with words and images that I've been sending nowhere. You know, to nowhere." She was silent for a long time, almost crying. But Maxim felt that this was not all. "You know, there's no response, no signal or action. None. And there can't be any." Max got angry. "I've always been the pessimist of the two of us. You were the one who always led the way, both when we were dealing with the dead and when we were approaching the ship. And not only that, I was against it because I didn't believe. But you believed and walked, and you dragged me along. We're here, aren't we? Came. Tell someone. They'll all laugh. They won't believe you, but we've come. Do you want the Turanians to be here in 2 minutes? It doesn't happen that way. It's not magic at the click of a finger, through time and space. These are technologies unknown to us, but they also take time. Do you remember what Pavel Ivanovich said after he cured Ivan's wife? 'It's the least we can do to thank you for saving the future of an entire empire.' Or something like that, but the meaning is the same. Remember? And they are grateful people, and they understand that they are in debt to us, most of all to you. Do you remember how beautifully he talked about the relationship of intelligent beings in the universe? You told me yourself. I'm sure they'll hear, find out, find a way to find us and help. But it takes time." And he spoke so fervently and convincingly that the drooping Elena began to come to life, although she certainly had more pessimism than faith in a good ending. "Max, you're doing great. I understand everything. I'm waiting. But no matter how little time we have." Half an hour later, Maxim nevertheless told Elena all the hardships of his investigation, of which the most significant was the doubt about the veracity of the head of the traffic police department about the timing of registration of the theft claim. If this is true, then there is nothing criminal in the activities of the colonel and his department, and we will only have to wait for the results of the search for the car. But Max didn't believe him. He didn't believe him. He couldn't explain why himself, and asked his wife to give an analysis of the situation, because she was an excellent analyst, as he had seen more than once. Lena asked a few clarifying questions, and despite the fact that Maxim was in a hurry to make it to a meeting with Captain Vasnetsov at 7, she was silent for 5 minutes, thinking, and Maxim did not bother her. Then she spoke. "You know, Max, I think I agree with you that everything is not clean here. Look at this." The statement was written at 9:30, and the hit and run, she even flinched after that word, but managed to pull herself together, was committed around 12:30. Usually, if a car is stolen, they try to hide it faster in a septic tank or get far away. And here? Where was the hijacker for 3 hours or more? Did he think the car wouldn't be missed, and he drove around the city calmly, and 3 hours later, when logically the interception plan should have already been announced, he drove down one of the central streets full of cameras? This is either a very stupid hijacker or it was the owner, the mayor's son, who was helped to concoct this fake statement retroactively. But it is impossible to do this without the head of the department, and then he made a mistake. This is one time. Second, usually the owner, having discovered the theft of his car, calls the nearest police station at his place of residence, and they already transmit the information to the traffic cops, announce an interception plan. It's rare for motorists to have a traffic police phone number, but here it's 02. It's simple. These are statistics. It would be necessary to clarify whether there was a call about this at the police station or not. There's nothing you can do about it, I'll do it myself. Well, and the third. Such expensive cars are usually stolen to order, not to be disassembled for spare parts. There are only 2 or 3 dozen such cars in the region, and the owners prefer to repair them in the branded salons where they were bought. Why then steal for spare parts that will never be in demand? Before executing an order for such a cool foreign car, they graze it for a long time, find out everything about the owner, his schedule, read the access code from the alarm system with a scanner, catch the moment so that the car does not break, and so on. And not everyone will decide to contact the mayor unless they are completely frostbitten. It is clear that the entire administrative resource will be used for the search, not even of the city, but of the entire region. The remaining option is that the order was made from another region. Quite possibly, but there's another discrepancy. Why did the hijacker drive around the city for 3 hours instead of disappearing right away? Yes, because the one who was driving did not worry about it at all, and did not even think about some kind of interception. He was not in danger. But when he ran over Alyosha, Lena looked at her son lying silently, took his hand again, stroked him and continued. He quickly ran off and hid, so much so that they couldn't find the car for a week. She's already in another area being repaired somewhere. The driver went there right away. What did the traffic cops say about Novosibirsk and the mayor's son? I don't want to go back to Novosibirsk. Quite possibly as an option. It is necessary to establish who filed the theft report. Ask the captain. If it's a son, it's one thing, but if it's a dad, it's something else entirely. Where was Sonny then? He's the owner. Or were you so upset that you couldn't come? Maxim felt that Lena was ready to further develop this topic, but he had to go to a meeting. She caught it, fell silent, stroked Alyosha's hand once more, and in a firm voice that could not have been expected from her an hour ago, she said, "Evil must be punished." She paused for a moment, considering her words. God forbid the colonel lied. I swear I will reach the prosecutor general, but I will get him removed from this position. Maxim calmed her now, stroking her hand. Lena, we don't need any attorney general. The system cannot be changed. It's easier for her to deal with you, the captain, and say goodbye than with the whole colonel, especially if the mayor himself is covering for him. I have no doubt about that. He could register a statement about the theft retroactively only at the personal request of the mayor. Or they'll transfer the colonel somewhere else, even with a demotion. But they won't lock him up, that's for sure. And I won't even put him down. I'll put him to bed for a long time, if not forever. He'll spend the rest of his life blowing bubbles and getting into diapers. No, bubbles are not needed. It's better to have a firm memory and even find out why he is being punished and let him think for the rest of his life. Lena shook her head in disbelief, though she didn't object. Well, Max, you're bloodthirsty. Maxime was not late for the meeting. The captain, when he looked through the window of the duty station, nodded his head at him as if he were an old acquaintance and waved a friendly hand saying, "Come in." Instructing Max before the conversation, Lena advised him not to introduce himself as a neighbor of Denise, who had lost his car. Maxime does not know the specifics of the Karpov family's life, the place where the car was allegedly stolen from, and he will definitely slip up when talking. And this is already Article 307. If it comes to a showdown, it is obviously false testimony. It's easier to tell the whole truth, and that this is not an attempt to mislead the investigation, but the only opportunity to meet with the captain, since there were no other ways, and he kept avoiding the meeting. Well, let him not shy away, but be absent from the workplace. You can believe it. There were 3 desks in the office, but only one of them, standing by the window, had a man in a police captain's uniform working on a computer. This was the Vaznetsov he was looking for. Without looking up from the monitor screen, he casually glanced at the newcomer and made an inviting gesture with his hand. Maxim walked over and sat down at the table. After a couple of minutes, the officer finished tapping on the keys, quickly scanned his notes and turned to the visitor. He turned to him with a kind of cheerful smile. To be honest, I didn't understand anything from the words of the duty officer. The only thing you can tell us about the case of a hit and run at a pedestrian crossing. Rather than inform you, Maxim began cautiously. "I would like to clarify how the investigation is progressing, and whether the culprit of this hit and run has been identified." He decided to put all the dots on the I. "I am the father of the injured child, Maxim Sergeyevich Averin." The smile slowly faded from the captain's face. He turned back to the computer, even stretched out his hand to the mouse, but only tapped it with his fingers. Then he pursed his lips and sort of cleared his throat. Max realized that the captain had made some kind of decision. "What can I say? The investigation is underway. We are working. But as for the culprit, so far there is nothing encouraging. The car that committed the hit and run is listed as stolen, but it has not yet been found." And he repeated the words of his boss almost word for word. "If we find a car, we'll find the hijacker." Maxim did not reinvent the wheel. "If you are like that, then so are we." Could it be that the owner specifically wrote a statement about the theft in order not to be responsible for the crime? Literally word for word, he repeated the question he had asked Colonel Nezhnov. The captain, without looking into the eyes of the father of the injured child, answered almost as the colonel did. "Hardly. I personally accepted the application from him on Friday morning, and I was hit around lunchtime." "And who is the owner of this car?" Maxim persisted, although he knew perfectly well who it was. He just wanted to test the reaction of this hard-working policeman and understand how deeply he was involved in all this. The captain was already looking at him with a certain amount of dislike, although he tried to hide it. "Why would you?" "He's not involved. The car's been stolen," he replied somewhat uncertainly. "Are you going to have a fight with him yet?" "But why is this?" Max stood up, trying to cheat, a little louder than necessary. "He's a victim too. Maybe, on the contrary, we should combine our search efforts." Maxim was by no means going to cooperate with the mayor's son. Now he has received another confirmation that this policeman is as slippery as his boss. Neither one nor the other has named the owner of the stolen car. Why? What is this classified information? Maybe it would be more correct if it was allegedly stolen. Then there really is something to hide. That's what... A metallic tinge appeared in the captain's voice. He began to be strict. "You don't meddle in this matter. These are not toys, and can be dangerous. We'll do it ourselves." Then he softened a little, but his tone changed, became more formal, by which the visitor should have understood that the audience was over. "I have nothing more to tell you. If there is any news, we will definitely inform you." Maxim completed his main task, received confirmation that the application was written personally by the mayor's son, but he still did not have confidence in this. Of course, it would be good to apply a measure of protection now. It is possible to find out the truth with her help, but Lena categorically forbade it, assuring them that they will figure it out using legal methods. Moreover, she asked me to call her as soon as something became clear, and she would tell me what to do next. And although Lena did not offer to cast a bait about Colonel Nezhnov, Maxim nevertheless could not resist and, trying to be as correct as possible, asked as he left the office, "Please tell me, did Colonel Nezhnov by any chance ask you to register a statement about the theft retroactively?" Max saw that he was in the top 10. The captain was clearly embarrassed, and his eyes looked surprised and frightened. Maxim even thought that his hands were shaking, but then, in order to overcome his embarrassment, the captain again assumed severity, and even stood up, resting against the tabletop. "What are you talking about? Stop it!" he almost shouted. "That's a crime." Well, you know. Max understood everything, and did not give the captain the opportunity to continue his devastating speech. He smiled innocently and muttered, "Excuse me," and left the office. When Maxim returned home, he called his wife and told her in detail, as she demanded, everything about his meeting with Captain Vasnetsov. Lena was waiting for something like this. After a moment's thought, she asked her husband not to do anything else until she called, after checking her assumptions. She did not specify what these assumptions were, and how she would check them if she was constantly in the hospital next to Alyosha. But Maxim did not insist. He knew his wife. Lena called closer to noon. Her voice was strained and somehow tired at the same time. "Max," she began slowly, "we have a problem." Maxim immediately realized that the problems that upset Elena so much appeared after his wife checked her assumptions. Lena, we have only one problem that we are not able to solve yet. He began abruptly, in order to shake his wife. This is Alyosha. The rest are the little things of life, which we will deal with anyway. Can you hear me anyway? Yes, Max, I get it. But listen anyway. She paused to find out what else Maxime would say, but he remained silent. Now I know for sure that our son was hit by the mayor's son, and all these ostentatious searches are just a play for us, and probably for the inspectors, just in case. Maxime had unlimited faith in his wife. He repeatedly had the opportunity to see her crystal honesty, the nobility that she showed even in situations in which he would not even think about his opponents. If she says now that the mayor's son is to blame, then that's it. Max felt a certain satisfaction and even self-respect. No, it was not for nothing that he constantly doubted both the conclusions of the head of the traffic police department and the stories of Captain Vasnetsov. There were berries from the same field. No, not really. The captain has a forced face, but that still doesn't excuse him. If you're an honest person, you should stay that way. Lena, realizing that her husband was burning with impatience, continued. I have a classmate in Novosibirsk who works in the transport prosecutor's office, Vlad Yuriev. I asked him to clarify whether Denis Karpov had flown from Novosibirsk to Kuzbas last Friday. It turned out that I took off on an evening flight at 21:15. The flight here with all the expectations in the storage and so on is only an hour and a half. Do you understand now? This Karpov shot down Alyosha at the crossing, immediately rushed to Novosibirsk, put the car somewhere for repair, and boarded the plane himself. From the airport, take a taxi home, and in the morning, as if nothing had happened at the traffic police. But he wrote the application on Saturday, not on Friday, although it was registered on Friday. And this was done at the suggestion of the head of the traffic police, most likely at the request of the mayor. He couldn't write a statement about the theft in the morning and get out of Novosibirsk in the evening. Maxime was delighted. He would never have thought of it himself. And his wife, being in the hospital all the time, managed to get important information, and even in another region. Well, isn't that a good fellow? Meanwhile, Elena continued. That's not all. After this became clear, I asked Vlad to look at the surveillance footage at the entrance to the city from Kuzbas around 4 or 5 o'clock. It's clear that this is unofficial, but he did it anyway and has now called me back. Denis Karpov caught on camera at the entrance to Novosibirsk. He was stopped by a traffic police patrol because he was driving with a broken bumper without a front license plate, which he most likely took off himself, so that it would be impossible to track him on the cameras. And here's a bummer. Vlad said that, judging by the notes, he didn't get out of the car for a long time. He talked to the traffic cops through the window, but they still forced him. And they were standing right under the cameras. Then Max came up with an interesting idea. Len, what if it's not him, but the hijacker? Max, Lena began to explain to the child. There may be a hijacker with a license in his pocket, of course, but it's unlikely. Only suckers leave documents for a car under a sun visor. But here they have an almost ready-made lawyer. If it had been a hijacker, the car would have been in the owner's possession a long time ago after all. It's almost been a week, or at least he would have been informed about it. And yesterday, the captain who's handling this case didn't know anything about the car. You talked to him yourself. And then, there is such a thing as social media, where you can find anyone and anything, even photos. So Denis Karpov is registered there, both in Odnoklassniki and Vkontakte. There's a picture of him there too. He's showing off next to his car. I sent Vlad a screenshot, and he confirmed the match. If it weren't for Alyosha's condition, Max would have been elated. Here he just asked Elena, Len, can I deal with the traffic cops and the mayor now? And most importantly, with this mayor's son. He said the last with a kind of disdain and contempt. Max, take your time. Don't be so bloodthirsty. Here a father defended his son, trying to get him out, if not out of prison, then out of the obvious shit. And with the police, it's even easier. A subordinate couldn't resist the requests of his boss, whether he was a colonel or a captain. What would you do? Do you know? Lena tried to be objective and merciful here too. You said yourself that evil must be punished. Maxim was perplexed. Maybe they should be given a chance to fix everything themselves and act according to the law. Elena did not give up. You'd better come over tonight. We'll discuss everything. No need to cut from the shoulder, Maxim promised. In the late afternoon, Maxim went to Alyosha's with Lena. He had a free pass to attend the second neurosurgery. His senior colleagues helped, but he did not abuse it. He did not come to sleep at night, or at night. Maxim usually entered the hospital through the main entrance, which was closed after the end of the evening visits to the sick by relatives, around 8. And now, leaving the car in the parking lot on the other side of the street, he calmly headed to the department. There was a police UAZ truck near the entrance, with both the drivers and back doors open. This seemed strange to Maxim. From the experience of his hospital, he knew that answers to questions related to victims of criminal disputes or accidents can be obtained in the waiting room, but certainly not in the lobby at the main entrance, where there is no one from the staff except an elderly security guard and a cloakroom attendant. And what do they know? The driver was sitting, or rather reclining, in the cab with his arms thrown back behind his head and seemed to be dozing. A real shepherd dog was lying by the open back door, with its head held high and its pink tongue sticking out of its open mouth. Her escort was not visible, probably hiding in the back of the cabin. It means that people have been sunbathing here for a long time. It didn't look like the police were visiting one of their sick relatives, and Maxim headed for the elevator without coming up with a reason for the police to come to the hospital. There was no one in the small lobby in front of the department, where relatives and patients usually sat on leather sofas at this time. There was also an empty place near the post where the nurse usually did paperwork. But at the end of the corridor, where his Alyosha was lying in the ward, it was crowded. Besides the people in white coats, Maxim noticed 2 men in police uniforms. My heart instantly sped up, began to beat alarmingly, and my legs involuntarily began to move faster. A little more and Maxim would have run, but a man in a white coat rushed towards him, whom Max recognized as the head of the department, Mikhail Yurievich. He was Alyosha's attending physician, and worked on him together with one of the intensive care units. The manager seemed extremely agitated, preoccupied, and at the same time confused, which was easily read by the bewilderment on his face. Stopping the agitated father on the approaches to the ward, he wanted to talk to him, but he didn't seem to know where to start. "What happened?" Maxim asked impatiently, even forgetting to say hello. He spread his arms to the sides, averted his eyes, and raised his eyebrows helplessly. "Maxim Sergeyevich, the most important thing is to calm down." "But what happened? What happened?" "We'd like to know what happened. It's just kind of mystical. And yet, are they all right?" He was trying to get an answer from the supervisor. "I hope so," Mikhail Yurievich muttered vaguely. "They're not in the room, Maxim Sergeyevich. They're—" He seemed to gather his courage and then suddenly blurted out, "They're gone." His hands dropped to his sides. Maxim felt an irresistible weakness in his legs and wearily leaned against the wall, while the doctor continued. "The nurse on duty came in to take her temperature at 6 as usual, but the room is empty. Imagine. It's empty. No boy, no mother. Everything is in place. Even your spouse's phone is on the bedside table. But they are not. My sister is here. I'm on duty today. We looked at everything ourselves first, checked all the wards and utility rooms. It's empty. Then we ran through all the floors and to no avail. Of course, if your son was walking, you could leave. But here you have a coma, and Elena Yurievna is quite a reasonable woman. I had to call the police. They even brought a search dog. She turned around in the room, but didn't even come out of it. She sat down and sits, and no one in the hallway or anywhere saw them. Neither the guards nor the staff in the waiting room. No one. They definitely didn't leave the building. We don't know what to think. I'm telling you, mysticism." Having finished his somewhat confused and agitated speech, Mikhail Yurievich decided to look into Maxim's eyes, raised his gaze, and was literally taken aback. Any more and his jaw would have gone down. Leaning against the wall, resting the back of his head against it and closing his eyes, Maxim was smiling. He was smiling, and he was smiling from the bottom of his heart. It was not a grimace, not a forced smile at one corner of his mouth, as happens with unpleasant news. It was a smile that a person is ready to share joy with others when he feels a sense of complete satisfaction. Stunned by this display of emotions that clearly did not correspond to the situation, the manager tugged at Maxim by the sleeve of the robe draped over his shoulders. "Maxim Sergeyevich, are you all right? Maybe this young man, who has been in a very stressful situation for the last few days, who received such unpleasant Simply murderous news today. Has gone crazy? Why not? What's there to smile about? But Maxim looked up from the wall, saw the astonished eyes of the manager, calmly and quite reasonably answered. Mikhail Yuryevich, I'm fine. I'm sure everything will be fine. They'll be found. He paused, as if trying to figure out what else to say so that on the one hand he wouldn't be considered crazy, and on the other without revealing a family secret. That's how I feel. After a few more meaningless phrases, Maxim went to the ward, asking for permission to sit there for a while. The manager was extremely pleased, and the police, who realized that the father and husband alone were not having tantrums and did not require an immediate continuation of the search, left him alone. If they had looked into the room, they would have seen Maxim sitting on a chair next to the bed with his fists clenched tightly, rocking continuously and repeating a prayer. Everything's going to be okay now. Everything will be fine now. He had no doubt that Lena and Alyosha were now very far from this ward, and it was not a fact that they were on Earth at all. Lena called about a day later. Maxim didn't know where to put himself or what to do all day. Elena ordered him not to apply any punitive measures to the perpetrators of the accident without prior joint discussion, which was impossible now for obvious reasons, and he could not break his word. It bothered him. He tried to read, watch TV, pace the room, paced from corner to corner, ate something, but his thoughts were far away. Not even thoughts, but just some fragments, jumping from one to the other, so when his cell phone rang, he instantly grabbed the phone. Max. Do you hear me? We're fine, Max. Do you understand? We're doing well. Alyosha is well, sends his regards. And then his son's joyful, sonorous voice was heard. Dad! Hi, I'm fine. I'm healthy. I'm already running. Maxim was silent, unable to say a word, because his throat was constricted, and large tears spontaneously rolled down from his eyes, which he was not at all shy about and did not even try to wipe away. Lena, surprised by the silence, became alarmed. Maxim, can you hear us? Clearing his throat, trying not to sniffle, Max replied, Lena, I'm here. I can hear you perfectly, and I'm very glad that everything is fine. Elena's voice warmed up even more. Maxim, my dear, thank you. Thank you for making me come out to the princess. If it weren't for you, if it weren't for your confidence, I do not know what would have happened. Then she added, Can you come now? Maxim rushed to the bedside table, grabbed his license and car keys. I'm on my way. It usually took Max 40 to 45 minutes to get to the rehabilitation center located in a neighboring city, but here he managed to do it in half an hour. Out of the corner of his mind, he knew that he was definitely on the cameras on the highway somewhere, and in the near future he had to wait for letters of happiness for speeding. But he wasn't particularly upset. Now was not the time. In order to get to the department, he had to use all his charm, eloquence, and the same pass to freely visit the hospital, because he entered through the emergency room, since the main entrance was already closed. Seeing that the elevator was stuck somewhere on the upper floors, Maxim did not wait, but ran up the stairs. The ward was quiet and deserted. There was no one in the corridor or at the post, and Maxim, trying not to stomp, cautiously approached the ward where his wife and his son, who had suddenly recovered, were waiting for him. Alyosha sat on his father's lap all evening until he fell asleep, and only after that the guys managed to talk. Lena looked surprisingly attractive. Where had her fatigue gone? The mournful wrinkles on her forehead, the circles under her eyes, in which Maxim saw a familiar gleam. Of course, the only son was healthy, but what else does a loving mother need? Elena's story was not very colorful. There were no descriptions of the splendor and attractiveness of the places where she and Alyosha had to visit, but it was accurate and concise, which was the main thing now. Usually, no one comes into our room at night, so I dozed off right here on the chair. I feel that someone is in the room, but I don't have the strength to open my eyes and look. I've been terribly tired these days, with so many worries and doubts. Lena was already talking about the past few days without any regret, calmly, as if it were an ordinary thing that wasn't worth much attention. Suddenly, I realized that a woman's voice is asking me to open my eyes right in my head, just like on the ship on the third mountain at the first meeting with Pavel Ivanovich. I was scared, but I opened my eyes. A pretty young woman is sitting next to me on a chair. Her hair is dark brown, wavy, and falls to her shoulders. I've always dreamed of them. She looks at me calmly and smiles, and then says, "Hello, Lena." Her voice is also pleasant, and her eyes are so friendly, almost like Mom's, even though she looked younger than me. "I am the Princess of Ilsenor," he says. "You called us, and we're here." I'm silent. I can't say a word. Then I started crying, and she's stroking my shoulder so softly. "Everything will be fine," he repeats. "You did the right thing by contacting us. We will cure your son." And I roared even harder, even though I knew she was calmly reading my thoughts in my head. The princess was saying something else, and I gradually calmed down. "How did you get here?" I ask. "And how did you hear my requests?" Everything turned out to be quite simple. That's what they think, but I still don't understand. When the Princess Ilsenora entered Earth's orbit, Pavel Ivanovich left a beacon buoy here so that it would be easier to get here if necessary. It was as if he felt or calculated everything. He was a 7th-generation AI. There was also some kind of equipment installed, which was configured for thought communication. And then, on the way, at every point of exit from hyperspace, he left something similar. Naturally flawed, only accessible to him. It turns out that distance doesn't matter for mental communication. At least within the galaxy, everyone can contact everyone. I just didn't know that. I didn't have any experience. Then, at the site, I talked to the AI and thought that it was all outside the third mountain and limited. What is very important is the inability to lie with this type of communication, because emotions are also transmitted here. My emotions and mental images, of course, got on this signal buoy, and then, as if in a chain, to Celia, to Pavel Ivanovich. He understood everything and was horrified. He continued to consider himself our debtor and decided to help me at all costs. You can see there was so much despair in my emotions that they realized it in another galaxy. We also realized that we can't do this on our own. He went out to the princess. She, an understanding and grateful girl, responded immediately. The AI brought all the sleeping youth and staff out of suspended animation in space, and everyone knew everything about the situation on Earth, and how many years they had spent here, and who had helped them too. Returning to another time was not a problem for them. They returned to their own with a slight shift so that everything would be sorted out. You can't go out during the battle. What were the escort ships doing with the invaders? And so everything really worked out. When the Emperor, Ilsenora's father, found out about the conspiracy and that his daughter was missing, he set everyone on their ears, tied almost everyone up, and found out all the details, except for one thing, where his daughter was. Even mento-scanning the defeated opponents did not help. They really did not know this. And the information allowed them to hope that the princess and the entire youth elite of the Empire were alive and well. Long-range reconnaissance ships scattered in search of neighboring galaxies, but they never reached Earth. I don't know how it is or what happened to the time shift, but everything was settled, and the father emperor of his only daughter could not refuse her request, but sent her not on a yacht, but just in case he immediately gave her a whole battleship. He has more firepower, and the speed is an order of magnitude higher. And most importantly, they have portable portals installed on warships, through which they can go wherever they need to, if the exact exit location is marked. And according to my mental images, they saw our entire ward and calculated everything. They reached us quickly through the lighthouses, and then the princess came to me and dived. Then it's simple. Alyosha in his arms and into the portal. I don't know what it is. There was a kind of swirl of space in the corner of the ward, like snowflakes spinning in a large cocoon, but they were almost invisible. Everything was at the level of sensations, and that was all. We've already left on the ship. It is located in the orbit of Jupiter, and they were already waiting for us there. And the medical capsule was already ready, and the Gravi platform was immediately taken away. By the way, I was also treated later. They returned us quickly too, but the princess said she was in deep debt anyway, and would take us to visit her, show us how well they were doing. We agreed. As soon as we're ready, I'll give her a signal. I'll contact her. That's it. Maxime, who remembered the amazement with which Lena and Alyosha's disappearance was perceived by the doctors, who could not find them in the hospital, and even called the police, wanted to clarify how they reacted to their return. It was interesting. "You know, Max," Elena replied thoughtfully, It even surprised me, as if we had never disappeared. They were more amazed that Alyosha had come out of his coma so suddenly on his own, and with such good results. I think our friends did their best here. They somehow influenced the memory of the doctors. You remember, after the departure of the Princess Ilsionora, the FSB didn't touch us either. I was sure that we would be bullied, terrorized. They couldn't help but remember our faces, and they should have cameras everywhere. But it's not. It's the same here. The Averin's forced vacation was coming to an end, and although it ended very happily compared to the first few days, Maxim still had some dissatisfaction. What is it? Some kind of? He was extremely unhappy that his wife did not allow him to have a showdown and punish the culprit, who almost killed their only son, and those who, using their position, covered him up and hid from retribution. Lena, Max admonished his wife, you supported me when I punished my abusers in prison. I also compared him to Schwarzenegger and cited him as an example. And what has changed now? They almost destroyed our family. Yes, you yourself called for evil to be punished. Is not it so? Elena, obviously reassured that Alyosha was alive and well and all the hardships and worries were over, was much less aggressive. She certainly wanted the mayor, the traffic police chief, the captain allegedly investigating their case, and the culprit of the accident to be punished, but only within the framework of the law. Her investigative work in the prosecutor's office, where the rule of law exceeded everything else, was so deeply ingrained in her essence that here, too, she would like to see the legality of punishment rather than lynching, which Maxime, who really looked at things, preferred. He convinced his wife that law enforcement officers would not put themselves in jail under any circumstances. It's even understandable, but Elena thought differently. In the evening, Maxim launched a decisive attack. Lena, he began from afar. Do you want the perpetrators of all our serious problems to be punished according to the law? But we haven't taken any steps to do this. We're all sitting and waiting for something. When will they feel ashamed themselves? We haven't contacted the police, the investigative committee, or the prosecutor's office. The prosecutor cannot initiate criminal cases. He only gives his consent to initiate them. Lena answered automatically, thinking about something of her own. Okay, He hesitated for a moment, searching for the right word. Enemies committed an illegal act. So, they know about it, but they think that no one else knows about it, and therefore they are silent. I think they already know that Alyosha has recovered, and assume that the parents will happily forget everything. They will not slow them down, and the matter will stop by itself. Very likely, Elena replied. But I think we need to show them that we know everything, and if they don't do anything after that, they will have to be punished. I can go to my own security service, but I'd rather deal with everything myself, because the mayor doesn't give a damn about the USB, and he's also to blame. When he was inaugurated, he swore an oath to serve the well-being of the residents of the entire city, to protect the interests of all citizens, and not just his own son to the detriment of others. He doesn't even have the right to work as mayor after that. Lena, realizing that Maxime was right in many ways, did not think for long. From the drawer of her computer desk, she took out several paper sheets, from which it was clear that these were photocopies of some documents. Vlad sent this by email today, and I printed it out, she said, and handed Max the first sheet. This is a copy of the protocol on an administrative offense against Denis Karpov for driving without a registration number. The date, time, and place of compilation are all specified. Even his signature is under the protocol. Here, she held out the second sheet, is a photocopy of his electronic ticket and boarding pass for the flight from Novosibirsk to Kemerovo. The date and time of departure are all indicated. On the third sheet, there was a passenger list for this flight, where there was a check mark against Karpov's last name. There was no doubt that Denis Karpov took off from Novosibirsk at 9:15 p.m. on September 13th. Maxime, armed with killer facts and confirmed documents, and therefore inspired, decided to go to Colonel Nezhnov as he had the first time after lunch. Then there will be fewer people, and no one will interfere with the conversation. There was no one in the reception area except for the secretary, who was also sitting at a high semicircular table. When she saw the visitor, she involuntarily stood up and said with a surprised, questioning face, "You." Again. Maxim, stretching his lips into a wide smile that looked like a smile only from afar, and even then, very relatively, replied. I am. Again. He was aggressive today, and he wasn't going to wait for his secretary to report him to his boss. She finally straightened up and tried to say something, but suddenly her face became confused. She involuntarily knitted her eyebrows, as if listening to herself, and after taking a couple of steps, she began to speak in a different, slightly frightened tone, and about something completely different. Will you sit for a minute? I need to leave right away. I'll come over and report you to Nikolai Sergeyevich. Sit down. I'll be quick. And then she literally ran out into the hallway. Maxim, of course, was not going to wait for her, because it was he who sent the lovely young lady over the fence, like a police inspector once, in order to pass unhindered to the head of the department. He didn't knock on the closed door. The colonel had hung his tunic over the back of his half-chair and was sitting in a shirt with a loose tie, carefully examining something on the monitor screen. Maxim wasn't interested in whether he was reading official documents or playing solitaire. After briefly greeting the owner of the office and not waiting for his answer, he walked uninvited to the chair that had been pushed back. To say that the colonel was surprised by his visitor's brusque behavior is an understatement. He was amazed, and just like the secretary, he just said, "You?" Maxim wasn't smiling this time. "Mr. Colonel," he began dryly, "it has been 2 weeks since my visit to you. During this time, neither you nor Captain Vasnetsov, despite promises, have given any information about the investigation into the hit and run on my son. I get the impression that the investigation is being delayed on purpose. Correct me if I'm wrong." Nikolai Sergeyevich wanted to yell at this brat who allowed himself to make claims to him, the police colonel, the head of the department, and even in such a form. And how he came in, without knocking, when even the majors knock beforehand, when the receptionist is not in the reception area, and this one, completely arrogant. But it was not for nothing that the colonel considered himself an intelligent man. And now, with difficulty, he pulled himself together and just as dryly, formally replied, "Your suspicions are completely groundless, sir." He hesitated, not knowing how to address this man, whose name he did not know. Maxim understood his difficulties and prompted, "Averin." That's it. Averin. You have not been informed about the progress of the investigation, because there is nothing to report yet. The stolen car was not found, and so was the hijacker. Maybe you're looking in the wrong place. Maxim interrupted his speech. The colonel was taken aback. He hadn't expected this. He was about to put this arrogant youth in his place, but he did not give him the opportunity. Maybe it makes sense to look for a car in the garage of the mayor or his son in Novosibirsk. After these words, the colonel's face instantly changed, and he himself became more stern, although it clearly did not catch his eye. He knew how to control himself, and there was no fear in his eyes. "Do you understand what you are talking about, Averin?" the policeman asked sternly, as it seemed to him. "I understand," Maxim replied, not at all embarrassed by the severity of his tone, taking out the treasured sheets from his briefcase. "But whether you understand that you will have to be responsible for this fake search performance is unclear." Here their dialogue was interrupted by a knock on the door, and an agitated secretary looked into the office and began to say more often, "Nikolai Sergeyevich, I went away for a minute, and this man did not wait, passed by without warning, although I asked to wait." This unexpected visit gave the colonel an opportunity to assess the overall situation. This boy knows something, and we need to try to figure out what and how he got to it. You shouldn't put pressure on him, you should talk to him, and then you'll see. "It's okay, Marina," he said as gently as possible. "We'll talk. But I don't need anyone to come to me yet. I'm busy," he finished a little more sternly. The secretary understood everything and quickly disappeared through the door, and Maxim handed the colonel photocopies of documents. To do this, he had to get up from his chair, but he was standing far from the boss's desk. "What is it?" Nikolai Sergeyevich sounded perplexed. "And you read it?" "It is interesting. If you want, this is your verdict, maybe." Max softened a little, but the grimace on his face said otherwise. He remembered that Lena had asked him to give the colonel a chance. Nezhnov pretended not to pay attention to the threats, but putting it aside in memory, began to carefully examine the first sheet, and Maxim began to comment. This is a report on Denis Karpov, drawn up by traffic police officers in Novosibirsk for driving without registration plates. The date, time, place, everything is there, as you understand. You must admit, it's hard to believe that a man filed a car theft report at 9:30, a child was hit by this car at 12:30, and at 16:30 the owner of the stolen car, who wrote the theft report himself, was detained in Novosibirsk, driving a stolen car. 300 kilometers from the crime scene. A paradox. Then why didn't he tell you about the miraculous return of the car to the owner the next day? And you've been unsuccessfully searching for her for 3 weeks? Nezhnov frowned. And there was a reason. He obviously hadn't expected this. It was necessary to decide something, to make some comments, but nothing good came to mind, and the colonel decided to stall for time. Maybe he'll come up with something. He moved on to the second sheet. And this is a photocopy of the ticket and boarding pass for the plane that Denis Karpov flew from Novosibirsk to Kemerovo. The date, time, route, and flight number are all there. The colonel wanted to grind his teeth and hiss from where. He knows, but I had to control myself. The main thing now is not to lose your temper. If he came here, and not to the USB or the prosecutor's office, it means he wants something. We need to find out what. Meanwhile, Maxim continued, Denis Karpov really visited you. But he wasn't there on Friday, but on Saturday, after he arrived. And I wrote the hijacking statement on Saturday, but you asked Captain Vasnetsov to register it on Friday. Or maybe they ordered it. I don't know. After all, it's easy to check from the recordings from the surveillance camera that you have installed in the neighboring building in front of the duty station. Denis Karpov was definitely not there on Friday when the report about the theft of his car was registered, and there cannot be, because he was not there. Or did you also withdraw all the records, just like at the bank at the crossroads? Maxim asked sarcastically. The policeman did not expect this either, and despite all his self-control, he involuntarily glanced at the safe, which stood to his right in the corner of the office. There were indeed discs with recordings from surveillance cameras from the bank and the duty station. The colonel was not going to destroy them. Who knows what? And suddenly someone will need them, so here they are, seized out of operational necessity. But how this Averant knows about the fate of the recordings is a very interesting question. Maxim was far from being as observant as the head of the traffic police department, but he noticed the colonel's gaze and realized that the recording discs were right there. Well, we'll have to withdraw them. Just for insurance. There will be another trump card. He remembered his promise not to refer to the head of the bank's security service in his search, but now that he had almost all the big cards in his hands, he was sure that Colonel Nezhnov would not be up to clarifying the circumstances of how Max found out about the fate of the records. And the guard didn't seem to be afraid of the cops either. In his agonizing search for a way out of the situation that was clearly not in his favor, Nikolai Sergeyevich realized one thing. Now he needed to negotiate in order to gain time before Averin went to the USB or to the prosecutor, or even much higher. Then you can find a way out. You can. There are no hopeless situations, especially with his potential, and now you can promise anything this Averin wants. The colonel leaned his chest on the table, making it clear that all ceremonies were discarded, and simply asked, "What do you want?" Then he added anyway, trying to figure out Max's next steps. "Do you understand that all this was obtained illegally and has no legal effect? And your son is already well. Why is he fighting with the mayor?" Maxim was prepared for this turn of events and answered quite calmly. "And you make a request to Novosibirsk, the traffic police and the transport police, and you will receive an official response. Your case hasn't been closed yet. And what do I want? Nothing special. Just bring this matter to an end as required by law. Now the crime has been practically solved and you have all the evidence of Karpov's guilt in your hands. Let the court decide whether he is guilty or not. My son recovered almost miraculously. He was in a coma for a week and could die at any moment. And if I were the mayor, I would ask you to do it myself. Because next time, this reckless driver will hit someone who won't recover. I think you wouldn't want it to be your relative? Well, then you will write an application for transfer to another city, so that everyone can be at peace. If you want, you can retire. You probably have enough seniority." That was not acceptable to the colonel at all. After Max's frank and direct statement, there was a prolonged pause, which Nezhnov had to break. "How much time do I have?" He clarified in a changed voice. His voice lost its confidence and edification. It became more sullen and tarnished. but it was difficult to understand whether this was a mimicry of the current situation or a real assessment of it. Maxim answered without hesitation. 2 days. The colonel looked up, calculating something in his mind. Not enough. We only have to wait 2 or 3 days for responses to requests, then we need to meet with the mayor to discuss the situation. Maxim deliberately interrupted him and came up with an idea that wasn't very good for himself, but he really wanted to see the mayor's reaction, how he would react to this and what he would say. And you tell him that the father of the injured child has dug up everything, threatens to go to the prosecutor's office and the USB. That's exactly what I'll do, the owner of the office said, grinning from the corner of his mouth. It's really true. Maxim realized that the conversation had come to an end, and it was time to leave, but he was still not sure of the sincerity of the colonel's intentions. Nezhnov, with a dull look and slumped shoulders, was still sitting with his arms outstretched and his chest resting on the table. But even now he did not resemble a repentant sinner at all, but rather a cornered beast. Such a predator becomes very dangerous and can bring a lot of trouble. Maxim saw this clearly and decided to play it safe. Nikolai Sergeyevich. He waited for the colonel to look up and continued. I must warn you that due to the unusual situation, I recorded a short video message where I told everything in detail. Now this file is hanging online and waiting in the wings. In the next second, Max saw that the colonel's gaze instantly transformed, became hard and penetrating. His lips tightened, causing the nasolabial folds to become excessively deep, and realized how right he had done, not believing the owner of the office. True. The unusual transformation lasted only a few seconds. Then the owner of the office became sullen and confused again. But that was enough. Don't be alarmed, Mr. Colonel, Maxim continued at the end of the metamorphosis. For now, he deliberately emphasized the word in his voice. He's hanging, and his future fate depends entirely on you. It's been stuck for 2 days, but if you think that's not enough time, I'll reschedule the upload for a week. If nothing changes during this time, or even more so if something happens to my loved ones or to me, the video will go to everyone who needs it. The governor, the prosecutor of the region, the Department of their own security, well, and the cherry on the cake. Just online, for everyone to see, so that everyone can see how some big bosses. Once again, the colonel barely managed to hold back a grimace of anger, but Maxim noticed it. He didn't care about all the grudges of the policemen, and if it hadn't been for Elena, this sleek boss would already be lying here and now just on the floor and blowing bubbles, or convulsing, or... At night, Max went over the punitive measures with sadistic pleasure for all the villains who had almost orphaned his family, but he didn't stop at anything in particular. If everything goes as we agreed, I will put this message somewhere in a safe, or I will keep it with friends. He looked at the colonel with a grin. For my own safety. I am not naive enough to believe in the sincerity of your repentance. After these words, Nikolai Sergeyevich Nezhnov suddenly turned pale. His eyes, as they say in romance novels, clouded, or, as sports commentators say about boxers who are knocked down, swam. The colonel's head fell on his outstretched arms, and he himself sprawled in a shapeless heap on the table at which he was sitting. Maxim was completely oblivious to the changes in his health. Just a simple fainting spell. It will pass in 5 to 7 minutes. If you have ammonia, it's even faster. It's a good thing he wasn't there. Even during the conversation about the discs with recordings from surveillance cameras from the bank and the traffic police station, Maxim noted that the door of the safe, where the owner of the office involuntarily glanced, was only closed, and the key was sticking in the lock. Perhaps the colonel took something out of the safe before Max arrived and got distracted. Or, conversely, planned to look there again in the near future. It was a good thing. Maxim, without thinking about the consequences, opened the safe and immediately saw 2 CDs on a small stack of paper folders, one in a plastic box, the other in a paper envelope. Obviously one is from the bank, the other is from the traffic police department on duty. By Senka and the Hat. Both of them moved to the evidence hunter's briefcase. Max lowered the back of the half seat a little, then, with some difficulty, shifted the owner of the office so that his head was neatly perched on its upper contour, and the armrests did not allow the owner to slide to the side. After this not puny exercise, Maxime did not deny himself the pleasure of patting the colonel on the cheeks. What is there to clap? In general, after that, the policeman began to show signs of life. He jerked his head, trying to turn away, mumbled something, and then tried to open his eyes. At parting, not without malice, but convincing himself that he was doing this solely in the interests of the colonel who had suddenly fainted, Max squeezed the sufferer's earlobe with all his might, so that he almost immediately opened his eyes and stared blankly at his executioner. Without any comment, he took his briefcase and left the office. Naturally, there was no one in the reception area. Maxime sent an unwelcoming secretary ahead of time along a route known to her. So he left the reception area without suspicious glances or comments, calm and unnoticed by anyone. In recent days, Elena often invited her husband to visit Princess Ilsionora at Celia. That's exactly what she said. To drive. As if it were about a small country walk, and not about traveling a distance that the ordinary human mind cannot even imagine. Maxim refused, referring to the need to bring to a logical conclusion the case of hitting his son. How will Colonel Nezhnov behave? Would he really give the case a legal go, which Max hardly believed in, or more likely, would he try to get out of it? Then we have to wait for trouble. Maxim was not afraid for himself. He didn't take bribes. He didn't drive drunk. He didn't steal. He didn't deal with drugs. What else is there? There was no point in physically eliminating it either, because sooner or later the delayed file would appear on the network and at the recipients, whom the colonel did not want to meet in any way. Of course, it will not be difficult for him to arrange an inspection of Max's car, with all the consequences. The Gaians are still magicians. Any witnesses will be divorced if you don't want to, but you will believe that yes, it was in the trunk of this very Logan that the drugs were found. But Max paid no more attention to this than an elephant to a pug. They'll put it down themselves and eat it if they're not tired of life. Moreover, then the file that kills the colonel will still get online. Lena and Alyosha were still the weak link. Well, God forbid. Lately, Maxim found himself thinking more and more often that he wanted to severely punish both the colonel and the captain, and the mayor with his son, Major, and everyone who does not live according to conscience. Of course, he wasn't a judge, but he wanted to. Sometimes he was scared by such thoughts, but more often he just dispassionately worked out his possible actions in his head, and even outlined ways to eliminate unnecessary possible problems. On Monday, when Maxime and Lena's vacation was over, and it was decided to send Alyosha to school, since he felt quite satisfactory, Max became convinced that his dislike of Colonel Nezhnov was well-founded, and he even regretted that he had left him in good health at the last meeting. Lena usually returned from work later than her husband, because it took much longer to get home from the center where the prosecutor's office was located than it did for Max from his hospital, which was located right there in the neighborhood. Lena was already at home by the time Max arrived today. At first he didn't think much of it, but when he saw her eyebrows drawn together from the hallway, her lips pursed, he realized that something had happened, and it wasn't for nothing that she was home so early. Without giving a sign or even trying to figure out from the doorstep what had happened, Maxime washed, changed clothes, and, according to a long-established tradition, went to the kitchen to drink coffee. Dinner would be later, but for now, the couple's much-loved coffee, over which they could just chat, discuss the day, and even complain if necessary. Max usually brewed the coffee, as he returned from work earlier, but he honestly admitted that Lena's coffee turned out to be tastier, richer, and more aromatic. The coffee didn't seem so impressive today, and the conversation in the kitchen wasn't going well, and Maxim nevertheless asked what happened, why Lena wasn't herself. Sipping a sip of her favorite drink without any pleasure, the wife, looking somewhere past Max, said with bitter irony, "Congratulations to you, Max. You're living with a bribe-taker." At first, Maxim did not understand either her black humor or the very meaning of what she said, and only after a few seconds, suppressing the inner anxiety that manifested itself with unpleasant sensations in his stomach, he thought, "It started. I shouldn't have listened to you." Closer to lunch, when Lena, like most of her colleagues, was about to go to a nearby cafe for a snack, a woman entered the office, wearing a rather wide-brimmed straw hat despite the not-at-all hot weather. The woman introduced herself as the mother of one of the very young robbers sitting in the detention center and awaiting trial, whose case was led by Elena and was supposed to represent him in court. The prosecutor's investigator did not have a chance to meet with the mother of this bastard, who did not spare a pensioner during his raid, who tried to protect his money from the bank and knocked him out with brass knuckles, kicking him, although she tried. But now Lena has listened to a lot of interesting things. What a wonderful child he is, and that he got into this case by accident, and took everything upon himself, because he is afraid of the main organizer of the robbery, a veteran criminal whose nickname she does not know, but if the investigator talks to him again, he'll tell you everything. At first, her voice, which was quite adequate, gradually switched to a patter. Then shrill notes and sobs were clearly heard in it, and then a real tantrum broke out with a stream of tears. There was no doubt about the sincerity of which. They literally flowed like a river. I even had to give this overly impressionable mother a drink of water, for which Lena had to rush out to the cooler standing not far from the office in the corridor. The decorative jug with stylized flowers, designed for this purpose, standing on the windowsill was pristine. And who would think of changing the water in it every day when the mistress of the cabinet is on vacation? By the time she returned, although she had been gone for 10 seconds, maybe 15, the river of tears had turned into a small stream, although the sobs were still audible. After Elena promised to carefully review the case once more, the calmed visitor left the office without even saying goodbye. Lena even thought that she did it too hastily, but she didn't pay attention to it. But after lunch, a completely nondescript man who introduced himself as a major of his own security service entered the office without knocking, accompanied by a disgruntled Viktor Stepanovich. He did not just guess about his unattractive appearance, but knew it for sure, and tried to compensate for this by the importance of his position and the ostentatious importance of the task he was performing. It was impossible to explain his excessive aplomb, self-confidence and lack of appeal in his judgments, his manner of bearing and speaking, with anything else. They won't keep ordinary arrogant fools in such a service. However, the prosecutor looked at him without even any show of respect. After a short introduction, the major said with obvious pleasure, "Elena Yurievna, our department has received information that you promised Citizen Rusakova, for a certain fee, to minimize the punishment of her son, who is accused under Article 162 of the Criminal Code. What can you say about this?" His overly correct speech did not bother the major at all, although it smelled of bureaucracy. Lena looked helplessly at Viktor Stepanovich. Citizen Rusakova had left this office no more than half an hour ago. Elena certainly hadn't expected this, so at first she was confused, but the boss just shrugged helplessly and spread his hands behind the major's back. Then he blinked his eyes reassuringly and nodded his head. "We'll break through." He believed in his employee. Lena pulled herself together anyway. "I can say that this is complete nonsense." She began unnecessarily sharply, but the major did not let her finish and unceremoniously interrupted her. "I would not advise you to behave like that. You understand that we would not have come here without any grounds, so I suggest that you voluntarily give out the illegally received funds. This will count for you." Lena paled, but then the colonel intervened, trying to smooth the situation somewhat. "Major, don't you think you're going a little overboard?" But he did not let the prosecutor finish either, believing that his status allowed him to interrupt his superiors. "Mr. Colonel, now we will search your investigator's office, and I think then you will not be amused. You will definitely change your point of view." He had no doubt about the results of the search, which was alarming. From where?